My mother looked across her dining room table and said, with a smile so practiced it almost looked real, that she didn't know how Jade survived with a mother like me. She said it just like that. Casual, like she was commenting on the weather. Uncle Warren set his fork down slowly. Aunt Patricia didn't move at all, and I picked up my glass of water, took one slow sip, and said nothing. Because I had learned, a long time ago, that the most powerful thing I could do in a room my mother controlled was stay completely, deliberately quiet. It was a Sunday. Gloria had called it a family dinner. That should have been my first warning. My mother did not host family dinners out of love. She hosted them when she had an audience she wanted to perform for and a point she wanted to make in front of witnesses. The table was set beautifully. She had made pot roast, cornbread, sweet potatoes, the green beans with the smoked turkey she only made when she wanted people to feel comfortable enough to lower their guard. The candles were lit. There was a pitcher of sweet tea. Everything looked warm. Everything looked like a home where someone was loved. Jade was in the back bedroom, watching a movie on my mother's old tablet. She didn't need to hear this dinner. I had learned to keep her away from conversations my mother turned into performances. I'm just saying, Gloria continued, smoothing her napkin across her lap like she hadn't just said what she said. That child needs consistency. She needs someone who isn't running in and out, dropping her off, picking her up, changing the schedule every other week. Children need roots, Naomi. They need stability. She has stability, I said. Quiet, even. My mother smiled at me the way she always smiled when she thought I was proving her point. Baby, you work 2 jobs. You're at that school all day, and then you're taking those night classes. When do you actually see that child? Warren shifted in his chair. Patricia refilled her glass of tea and looked at the centerpiece. I see her every morning, I said. I see her every evening. I take her to school. I pick her up. I know her teacher's name, her best friend's name, what she's afraid of, and what makes her laugh. I know her. Knowing someone and being present for someone are 2 different things, my mother said. And then she turned to Warren, because she always turned to her audience when she was about to deliver the line she'd rehearsed. Warren, you remember how it was when Jade stayed here those weeks last month? How much calmer she was. How she slept through the night. Warren said nothing. He just nodded once, slowly, the way men nod when they don't want to get involved, but also don't want to contradict the woman who cooked their meal. That nod, that small, cowardly nod. I felt something move through my chest. Not rage. Not even hurt. Something colder than both of those things. Something that had been quietly building for a long time. I thought about the phone call I had gotten 4 days earlier, from a number I didn't recognize at first. A woman's voice, professional, careful. She had introduced herself as Miss Beverly Harmon, Jade's teacher. I thought about what Miss Harmon had said, and I picked up my glass of water again and took another sip. I hear you, Mum, I said. Finish what you were saying. Because I needed everyone at that table to hear exactly what Gloria Cross believed about me and my daughter. I needed it said out loud, in front of witnesses, before I showed them what I had. My mother smiled like she had won something. She hadn't won anything. She had just started the clock. I want you to understand something about my mother before I tell you the rest. Gloria Cross is not a monster. That would be easier. Monsters are obvious. You can point at them. You can name what they are and people believe you. My mother is charming. She is church-going. She has a laugh that fills a room and a potato salad that people request by name at every cookout on the block. She raised 2 children mostly alone after my father left when I was 9, and she will tell you that story about the sacrifice, the struggle, the strength it took at any gathering where someone will listen. What she will not tell you is that she raised those 2 children very differently. My brother Marcus got patience. He got second chances, grace, the benefit of every possible doubt. When Marcus dropped out of community college at 20, my mother told him he just needed time to find himself. When Marcus lost his apartment at 24, he moved back in and stayed for 3 years. My mother made his favorite meals and didn't charge him $1. When I got pregnant at 26, alone, by a man who made it very clear he was not going to stay, my mother sat across from me at this same table and said, "Well, I guess that's what happens." Not "I'm here for you," not "we'll figure this out together," not even simple, basic human warmth. I guess that's what happens. I had Jade alone. I went back to work 6 weeks after she was born because I had no choice. I built my life in careful, exhausting increments: the paraprofessional position at Clover Hill Elementary, the night classes I took 2 at a time, the small apartment I paid for myself in a neighborhood that wasn't glamorous but was safe and mine. I did all of it while nursing a baby, then chasing a toddler, then helping a little girl with her homework at the same school where I worked all day. I did not ask my mother for much, but there were times I had to. When Jade was sick and my shift couldn't be covered, I called my mother. When I had a certification exam I couldn't reschedule, I called my mother. When my car needed a repair that wiped out my savings and I needed someone to pick Jade up from school for 2 weeks, I called my mother. And every single time my mother helped. I want to be honest about that. She showed up, but she kept a ledger. Every favor was a debt. Every time she helped, she subtracted something from my credibility as a mother, as a woman, as a person who had any right to make decisions about her own child. The help was real. The cost was invisible until it wasn't. Last month, when my schedule shifted and I needed someone to take Jade in the afternoons for 3 weeks while I completed my final certification module, I asked my mother again. She agreed. She was gracious about it. She seemed honestly happy. I should have paid more attention to how happy she seemed, because something changed in those 3 weeks, something I didn't see happening. Something my 7-year-old daughter absorbed in the afternoons while I was in class, in my mother's kitchen, in her living room, in the small, quiet moments my mother filled with things I never heard. I didn't find out from Jade directly. Children don't always tell you what they're carrying. Sometimes they just start carrying it differently, and you have to learn to read the weight. It started with sleep. Jade had always been a good sleeper. Since she was 3 years old, our bedtime routine was solid bath, 2 books, 1 song, lights out. She went down easy. She stayed asleep. It was one of the things I was genuinely proud of, the way my daughter felt safe enough at night to just rest. In the second week of the afternoon visits with my mother, Jade stopped sleeping through the night. She would come to my room at 2, 3 in the morning. Not crying, not scared exactly, just needing to see me. She would climb into my bed and press herself against my side and be asleep again in minutes. But she needed to be next to me first, like she had to confirm I was still there. I told myself she was just adjusting. The schedule change, the new routine, kids pick up on stress. Then came the questions. One Thursday night, I was sitting on the edge of her bed after the second book, and Jade looked up at me with those dark, serious eyes she gets when something is turning over in her mind. And she said, "Mommy, did you ever not want me?" I went completely still. "What?" I said. I kept my voice soft, even, but my heart had stopped. Grandma said sometimes mommies have babies and then they realize they didn't really want them. She said it carefully, the way children repeat things they've memorized without fully understanding. She said some mommies love their babies, but they just aren't ready to be mommies yet. I sat with that for one long breath. "Did Grandma say that to you?" I asked. Or was she talking about someone else? Jade looked at her blanket. "She said you were very young when you had me, and that you had big plans and I wasn't part of the plans. I reached over and turned off the lamp. I lay down next to her. I pulled her close and I let her hear my heartbeat, the way I used to do when she was a baby and nothing else would settle her. You were the plan, I said. You were every plan I ever had that actually mattered. She fell asleep before I finished the sentence. I lay there in the dark for a long time. The next morning, I dropped Jade at school. I walked her to her classroom, and when Miss Beverly Harmon opened the door, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Professional, measured, but with something underneath it that felt like intention. Miss Cross, she said, I'm glad you came in person today. Do you have a moment before your shift starts? I did. What she told me changed everything. Miss Beverly Harmon had been teaching second grade for 16 years. She said that in our first conversation, not as a credential, but as context. She wanted me to understand that she knew the difference between a child going through a rough week and a child who was processing something that had been said to her directly. She knew how to tell the difference between anxiety and confusion and the particular kind of quiet that settles over a child who has been told something that doesn't fit with what they know to be true. Jade had that quiet. She'd had it for almost 2 weeks. Miss Harmon walked me through it carefully. She told me that Jade had started drawing pictures during free time that she didn't want to share. That during a class discussion about families, Jade had said something that made Miss Harmon pause, that some mommies have babies by accident and then have to learn to love them. That 2 days later, during lunch, Jade had asked her classroom aide if it was normal for a mommy to be sad that she had a baby. Miss Harmon had not panicked. She had not overreacted. What she had done was begin writing things down. I didn't call you right away, she told me, because I needed to be sure I was documenting accurately. I wanted pattern, not incident. She had a small notebook on her desk. Dates. Jade's exact words. The context of each conversation. The questions Jade asked. The things Jade drew. All of it in Miss Harmon's clear, careful handwriting, dated and time-stamped. I sat across from her and felt something I had no name for. It was somewhere between grief and gratitude. Someone had been paying attention to my daughter when I couldn't see what was happening. Someone had taken it seriously. Someone had written it down. I also want you to know, Miss Harmon said, that I spoke with Principal Jennings this week. She is aware of what I've been observing. We wanted you to have the full picture before we decided together what the appropriate next steps are. I asked her one question. What does Jade seem to believe right now? About me? Miss Harmon was quiet for a moment. She's confused, she said finally. She loves you completely, but she's been given information that conflicts with that love and she doesn't know what to do with it. I nodded, I thanked her, I stood up and I went to my shift. I worked the whole day without showing a single thing on my face. But I called Tiffany on my lunch break and I told her everything. And Tiffany, who had known me for 6 years and knew exactly what my mother was capable of, said one thing before I could finish. She did that to a 7-year-old, Naomi. To your baby. Yes, she did. And I was done being quiet about it. The week before the Sunday dinner, my mother made her moves. That is the only way I can describe it. She was strategic about it. She called Warren. She called Patricia. She called 2 women from her church who didn't know me well enough to question what they were hearing. She positioned herself, carefully and deliberately, as a grandmother who was concerned. A woman who loved her grandchild. A woman who was watching a situation and feeling worried. She did not call me. I found out from Warren, who called me on a Wednesday evening, uncomfortable and stumbling over his words, to say that Gloria had mentioned she was worried about Jade's adjustment, that she'd noticed some behavioral issues, that she thought maybe Naomi was taking on too much and it might be worth having a conversation as a family. I listened to every word Warren said. I asked him when the dinner was. He told me Sunday. I said I would be there. Then I called Tiffany and told her what was happening. She's building a case, Tiffany said. She's getting people in the room before you can get there first. I knew that. I had grown up watching my mother do exactly this. She was not confrontational by nature. She was architectural. She built structures of perception before she ever made a move. By the time you realized what she'd constructed, you were already inside it and the walls were already up. This time, I had something she didn't know about. On Friday afternoon, I picked Jade up from school. Miss Harmon was standing at the classroom door as always. She handed me Jade's backpack. And then she handed me something else, a manila envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in Miss Harmon's handwriting. I thought you might want to have this before the weekend, she said, quiet, professional, no drama in her voice at all. I thanked her. I buckled Jade into the car. I drove home. I made Jade her snack, put on her afternoon show, and sat down at the kitchen table. Then I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 things. The first was Miss Harmon's handwritten documentation, 8 pages, dated entries going back 14 days. Every conversation, every drawing, every question Jade had asked about mothers and babies and plans and wanting. Miss Harmon's notes were precise and professional, no editorializing, no dramatic language, just dates and words and observations, written by a woman who had been in a classroom long enough to know what mattered and what would hold up if someone ever needed it to. The second item was a typed summary, 2 pages. Miss Harmon and Principal Carol Jennings had both signed the bottom. It described the pattern of behavioral change observed in Jade over the 2-week period, noted the specific statements Jade had made that indicated she had received distressing information from an adult outside the school, and stated clearly that the school had a responsibility to document and report when a child's emotional well-being appeared to be impacted by communication from a caregiver or family member. The third item was a single folded page, a letter addressed to me directly from Miss Harmon alone, not official, personal. I'm going to tell you what it said in the only way I know how, which is that it was the kindest thing anyone had put in writing for me in years. She told me she had watched me bring Jade to school every single morning. She told me she had seen the way Jade lit up when she talked about me, the meals I made, the songs I sang, the games we played on Saturdays. She told me that whatever was being said to Jade elsewhere was not matching the child she saw in that classroom, a child who was deeply, securely, visibly loved. She told me she was sorry I was going through this, and she told me she would be available if I ever needed her to speak on what she had documented. I sat at that table for a long time. I did not cry. I have learned, over many years, to hold my emotion until I am somewhere safe enough to release it. I was not there yet. I folded the letter carefully and put everything back in the envelope. I went and sat with Jade while she watched her show. She climbed into my lap without looking away from the screen, the automatic way children fold themselves into the people they trust completely. I held her. Sunday was 2 days away. I had everything I needed. The Sunday dinner went exactly the way my mother planned it until it didn't. She performed for about 40 minutes. She talked about Jade's sleep problems, which she attributed to my inconsistent schedule. She talked about how Jade had seemed confused lately, emotional, asking big questions, which she framed as the natural result of a child who needed more stability than she was getting at home. She talked about herself as a resource, a constant, a grandmother who showed up. Warren nodded. Patricia made sounds of quiet agreement. The pot roast sat in the middle of the table getting cold. I let her finish. Then I reached into my bag. I set the manila envelope on the table. I did not open it yet. I just set it there and I watched my mother's eyes drop to it, and I watched her try to figure out what it was. Jade's teacher sent this home Friday, I said. Miss Beverly Harmon. She's been teaching second grade for 16 years. She's also been documenting Jade's behavior for the past 2 weeks because she noticed a change that concerned her professionally. Gloria's expression shifted, just slightly. She kept the smile, but something moved behind her eyes. Naomi, this is a family conversation. This is a family conversation, I agreed. That's exactly why I want to read it here. I opened the envelope. I took out the signed summary, the 2-page document, with both Miss Harmon's signature and Principal Jennings' signature at the bottom. I set it flat on the table so the signatures were visible. This is a formal document from Clover Hill Elementary, I said. It describes a pattern of behavioral change in a 7-year-old girl over a 2-week period. It documents specific statements that Jade made to her teacher and classroom aide about mothers, babies, plans, and whether she was wanted. Patricia put her fork down. Warren went very still. I turned to the handwritten notes. I did not read every page. I read 4 entries. I read them slowly and clearly, in the same quiet voice I use when I am reading to Jade at bedtime. I read the dates. I read Jade's exact words. The question she asked her aide at lunch, the thing she said during the family discussion, the way she described what her grandmother had told her about mothers who weren't ready. The room was completely silent. My mother opened her mouth. Children misunderstand things. You know how Jade is. She takes things out of... Miss Harmon also wrote me a letter, I said. I did not raise my voice. A personal one. She says in it that Jade is one of the most securely attached children she has taught. That every morning when I drop her off, Jade talks about me with pride and love and excitement. That the confusion she's been carrying for 2 weeks is not consistent with the child she knows, which means it came from somewhere specific. I set the letter on top of the other papers. Somewhere specific, I said again. I looked at my mother. Gloria looked at the papers on the table. She looked at Warren. She looked at Patricia. Nobody looked back at her. That was the moment. Not loud, not theatrical, just the particular silence of people who have been watching one person perform for years, finally seeing the stage clearly for what it was. Naomi, Warren started. I'm not angry, I said. And I meant it. I'm here because my daughter came home asking me if I ever wanted her. I'm here because a teacher at her school cared enough about my child to write things down for 2 weeks before she said a word. I'm here because whatever is said in private has a way of becoming public, especially when a 7-year-old girl trusts her teacher enough to repeat it. I gathered the documents carefully. I put them back in the envelope. I came here tonight. I said, so that this conversation happened in front of witnesses, so everyone at this table knows what was said to my daughter, who said it, and what the school has on record. I picked up my bag. Jade won't be spending afternoons here anymore, I said. That decision is made. It's not a discussion. I stood up. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I was trying to help. I know you believe that, I said. I genuinely do. But what you told my daughter cost her 2 weeks of good sleep and her sense of whether she is loved. That's not help. That's damage, and I need you to sit with that. I pushed in my chair. I walked to the back bedroom and I opened the door gently. Jade was asleep on the bed, the tablet dark beside her, one arm curled under her cheek. I picked her up. She stirred but didn't wake. She pressed her face into my neck the way she always did when I carried her. I carried my daughter through my mother's dining room without looking at anyone at the table. I walked out the front door. I buckled her into her car seat. I started the car. I did not look back at the house. I did not hear from my mother for 11 days. When she finally called, it was a Wednesday evening. Jade was in the bath. I let the call go to voicemail. I listened to it after Jade was asleep. My mother did not apologize in the voicemail. She is not built for direct apology. What she said was that she had been thinking. and that she realized she may have said some things to Jade that weren't appropriate for a child that age, and that she hoped Naomi would give her a chance to explain where she was coming from. Where she was coming from. I sat with that phrase for a long time. I texted her back the next morning. Short, clear. I told her that I would be willing to talk, but that any future relationship between her and Jade would require that certain things were understood and agreed to. That she did not have permission to discuss my choices as a mother with my daughter, that she did not have permission to create confusion or doubt in Jade about whether she was loved and wanted, that if she could commit to that, genuinely and completely, we could move forward carefully. I also told her that Miss Harmon's documentation was on file with the school, not as a threat, as a fact. She read the text. She didn't respond until that evening. When she did, she said okay. Just okay. It wasn't the tearful acknowledgement I might have wanted in a different version of this story, but I am a realistic woman. I know my mother. I know what she is capable of giving and what she isn't. Okay, from Gloria Cross, was something. It was not nothing. Warren called me that week. He was awkward about it in the way that Warren is always awkward when he is trying to say something real. He told me he hadn't known the whole picture. He told me the dinner had given him a lot to think about. He didn't say anything directly critical of my mother, because Warren is Warren, but he said, "You're a good mother, Naomi. Jade is lucky." I thanked him and let it go. Patricia sent a text that said she hoped things worked out. I appreciated the gesture without expecting more from it. The person I called to tell everything to was Tiffany. We sat in my car in the school parking lot on my lunch break, and I told her the whole thing from the Sunday dinner to my mother's voicemail to Warren's call. And Tiffany listened to all of it, and then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. Tired, I said, but clear. That was the truest answer I had. The week after all of this, I stopped by Miss Harmon's classroom after school. Jade was with the after-school program for 30 minutes. I knocked on the open door. Miss Harmon looked up from her desk. I didn't have a speech prepared. I had just wanted to say thank you in person, without the envelope between us, without the formal weight of what it had carried. "You didn't have to write those things down," I said. "You didn't have to give me that letter." Miss Harmon set down her pen. "Yes, I did," she said simply. "Jade is my student. What happens to her in this classroom matters. What happens to her outside of it matters too." I nodded. I thanked her. I left before I said anything that embarrassed me, but I held onto it the whole drive home. The fact that someone had seen, the fact that someone had written it down, the fact that a woman who owed me nothing had paid enough attention to my daughter to notice when something was wrong and had cared enough to do something about it. That matters. In a world where Black women are used to being invisible, unsupported, and disbelieved, that matters more than I can explain in a single word. 3 weeks later, I passed my final certification exam. I found out on a Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen in my work clothes, waiting for the coffee to finish. The email came through, and I read it twice before I believed it. Then I stood there by myself, in my quiet kitchen, and felt something move through me that was bigger than any single emotion I have a name for. I had done it. Around every shift, every night class, every bedtime routine, every morning drop-off, every difficult phone call and family dinner and document and sleepless night, I had done it. I texted Tiffany first. She sent back so many capital letters that I laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. Then I went to Jade's room. She was still asleep, her arm around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. I sat on the edge of her bed and I looked at her for a long moment. "Hey," I said softly. "Wake up, baby. I have something to tell you." She opened her eyes, blinked at me, reached up and patted my face with one small hand. "Mommy passed her test," I told her. She didn't fully understand what that meant yet. She was 7. But she understood the feeling in my voice, the way children always understand feeling before they understand facts. She sat up and wrapped her arms around my neck. "Are you happy?" she asked into my shoulder. "Yeah," I said. "I'm really happy." She pulled back and looked at me seriously. "Can we get pancakes?" I laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and uncomplicated. "Yes," I said. "We can get pancakes." We went to the diner on Clement Street, the one with the big booths and the strawberry syrup that Jade loved. We sat across from each other, and Jade told me about a dream she'd had about a horse who could do math, and I drank my coffee and listened to every word. There was a moment, somewhere between her third bite of pancake and the part of the story where the math horse won a spelling bee, where she looked up at me and just smiled. No reason, just smiled at me because I was there and she was there, and that was enough. I thought about the question she had asked me in the dark 3 weeks ago, whether I had ever not wanted her. I thought about everything that question had cost her, everything it had cost me. And I thought about the fact that we were sitting in a booth at a diner on a Tuesday morning eating pancakes together, and that she was mine and I was hers, and that no one, not my mother, not anyone with a ledger of my failures, not anyone who had ever looked at me and decided before I spoke what I was worth, no one had been able to touch what we actually were to each other. The truth has a way of surviving everything people try to bury it under. I just had to be patient enough to let it breathe. She asked me if I ever didn't want her, and the only answer that ever mattered was the one she already knew.